everyone, and welcome to Careers Life in Yale's Career Reflections channel. I am so excited to say that tonight's show is on Yale Women in Government. And we have three fantastic Yale Women panelists with us, all of whom have established their careers in US government, but in different ways. And my name is Yvette Rivers. I graduated from Yale College in 96. I was in Grace Hopper College, which you see here in my background. And I'm in my first year on the YAA Board of Governors. I'm also on the Yale Club of Washington, D.C.'s board. And Corinne Krikorian and I are the producers of this Career Reflections channel. And we're just so thrilled to welcome everyone to the show tonight. So thank you for coming. Just a few notes before we get started with our program. We are recording, as you saw, we're recording this program, and it will be available on Yale's Vimeo channel if you want to watch it or share it with your friends or your fellow alums. Please do stay muted throughout until we get to the time when we are, interacting and communicating with questions and answers. And then finally, I just wanted to share, I wanted to strongly encourage everyone to join YAA's Cross Campus if you haven't already. The Cross Campus is actually an online community that now has close to 20,000 Yalies in the network, and it's really a great opportunity to network with pre-vetted Yalies. There's about 2/3 of those are alums, and the rest are students. And there's also an opportunity if you're interested in having a mentorship opportunity with students. There's a lot going on with that program, so I encourage everyone to check it out at crosscampus.yale.edu if you haven't already. And then finally, just a few thank yous before we move forward. Definitely wanted to thank our amazing panelists for joining us tonight and carving out time in their very hectic schedules. I also wanted to thank the YAA staff that make this Thursday program available, Steve Bloom and Chelsea Gladu and Kate Gustafson. And then finally, thank you so much for the Yale Club of Washington for being a co-sponsor and helping to spread the word about tonight's event. So, so that's that. And let's talk about what we're going to discuss tonight. Really, we are going to get in a peek into what it's like to choose a career in the US government and from three highly accomplished Yale women with legal backgrounds. We have Rahima Abdelalim, class of 1998 with us, Jillian Apfel, class of 96, and Samantha Heifetz was Yale Law 2005. And I'm not sure how many of you know this, but many Yale alums choose government careers. A career in government is actually the fourth most popular profession of Yale alumni, and that's including alums who graduate from Yale College and all the graduate and professional schools. And law, and I'm sure most of you won't be surprised by this, but law is actually the second most popular. So our panelists this evening really represent an interesting cross-section of these two very popular professional pursuits among Yale alumni. And I think all of our panelists are really great examples of alums who choose government service as a way to make a difference in our country and in our world. So thank you all for joining us. So for the first part of our time together, I will facilitate a conversation with our panelists. I just have a few questions for them. And then after that, we'll open it up for the rest of you to ask questions on screen, or you can ask questions in the chat. So start thinking about the questions that you have so we can get into that discussion a little bit later. All right, so let's get to know our panelists. Instead of me reading their very impressive bios, I really would like to ask each one of our panelists to just start off with introducing yourself, just sharing a little bit about your background and the work that you do today, and maybe just share a little bit about what you enjoy the most about your profession. And let's start with Rahima.
Thank you so much, Yvette, for having us here tonight. So as she mentioned, I am Yale TD, class of 98. Love TD. I currently serve as Deputy General Counsel in the Executive Office of the President, Office of Administration. It's one of the 12 components of the White House. I liken it to like an engine to a machine. So we are basically the administrative arm that helps the White House work. And so on a daily basis, I am doing legal work that involves issues of fiscal law, procurement law, personnel law, e-discovery. So a lot of the nitty gritty of helping to ensure that the White House and all of those components have the legal services that they need on a very administrative level. I've been there since 2015. And so, as we'll talk about a little later in the program, I am a career staffer. But my entry into government was through the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. And so I spent the first about 6 years 8 years. See, my math isn't good. See, that's why I'm a lawyer. Probably the first 8 years of my career in government was spent at DOJ Civil Rights Division, and I could talk for days about how I loved working in Civil Rights Division. DOJ is just being surrounded by the nation's preeminent lawyers. And I still, even at the White House, have an opportunity to kind of keep my fingers in some of the racial justice and equity work that we're currently doing because civil rights is one of my passions, and making sure that our legal system is guided by principles of fairness and equity are something that I hold very dear. And so I think I will always be a civil rights lawyer, and I have, from the beginning of my legal career into the present, really has tried to remain connected to those civil rights issues. And so I like that. It's probably one of the issues that I like the most about my current job is that it lets me do both administrative work, but also substantive areas of the law that I'm very interested in. And so I look forward to getting some great questions from you all, but I just wanted to start off with that little brief discussion.
Thank you, Rahima. All right, Jillian, why don't we hear from you next?
Thanks, Yvette. And you might have noticed, of course, that Yvette and I are both we're in Hopper class of 96, and we were actually first year roommates, suite mates, many, many moons ago. I'm very happy to be here and really excited to respond to your questions. I'll just give you a brief intro. Following Yale, I went to Harvard Law School. Like Rahima, she and I also have discovered that we both were involved with the Harvard Legal Aid Bureau, which is we were both pretty passionate about. And then I practiced law for a little while in Seattle, wound up transitioning then into the NGO world, working with the International Rescue Committee with refugees, asylees, and victims of human trafficking. And was looking to spend more time overseas. I had not really considered international work or living overseas that much when I was in college, even though I did do a semester abroad at Yale, which was pretty unusual at the time. But because I was working with the United States Refugee Admissions Program, I had learned a lot about the State Department and began the somewhat arduous process of joining the Foreign Service, which I'm also happy to talk about. So for the Foreign Service, you are, unlike us, the civil service, even though you're working for the federal government, you're spending a lot of time working in our missions and overseas. And you generally switch assignments or tours every 1 to 5 years. And so since joining in 2006, I've worked in Jamaica, Thailand, Iraq, Canada, and Italy, and done several assignments in Washington, DC. And I find that the travel to be incredible, but I also really enjoy the variety of the work. There's a variety within the assignments, and then you are always changing assignments. There are downsides to moving that often, but there's also a lot of other opportunities through the State Department. There are various master's programs, details at war colleges throughout the country, and the incredible opportunity that I have right now, which is I'm on a sabbatical fellowship. I'm working on a passion project related to my identity as a Jewish American diplomat. And part of what I enjoy the most about it actually right now is that, and this is also a little pitch for the Virtual Student Federal Service, which is an opportunity for college students or master's degree students or graduate students to work for the federal government as a virtual intern. It's at VSFS, you can Google it. And on my project right now, I'm working with 3 interns across the country, 2 undergraduates and a graduate student, and that has been really great for me to be part of a team, even though I'm doing a solo sabbatical right now.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you, Jillian. All right, Samantha.
Hi, good evening. Well, it's bad enough to have to go after Rahima and Jillian. Then you add to that I need to start my bio with the fact that I'm a graduate of Harvard College, not Yale College. And it seems like we're off to a poor start. But of course, things improve, I think, after a sort of 2-year, not terribly imaginative, but highly educational stint in the world of strategy consulting. I made my way to Yale, to the law school. After graduating, spent 2 years clerking for 2 just wonderful, wonderful judges, and happy to talk about ways in which people who go to law school and are questioning whether it was a good decision or not can sometimes, just in the course of finding 2 wonderful mentors at the outset of their career, feel tremendous relief that no matter what else happens, you at least got those 2 wonderful years in someone's chambers, and that alone can make law school worth it. From there, I wound up at the Department of Justice through the honors program in the civil division on the appellate staff. I was certain I would only stay for 3 years max, and therefore did not apply for the federal loan relief program that required you to stay for 3 years, because if you left, you had to repay the money you'd received, and that seemed very risky because I surely would probably not even be there a full 3 years. 15 years later, I may have a certain amount of regret about that decision, but the loans are paid off, and so we shan't revisit it. Part of the reason that I have stayed as long as I have is that over the course of these many years with the with the civil division's appellate staff, I've also gone on detail a number of times. So in 2010, I came to the White House to work with the Office of Communications Research in conjunction with now Justice Kagan's nomination, working with the communications team here, doing rapid response at that time. In 2014, 2015, I went to the Hill, joined Senator Franken's office as staff for Senate Judiciary Committee. He was leading and then became ranking member on the subcommittee on privacy, technology, and the law. And so I was a counsel there. And then each time went back to the Justice Department, and now currently I have been on details since April, serving as deputy counsel to the vice president. In terms of the question at the outset, what I enjoy most, well, for each of these different jobs in the law, there's a little bit of a different answer, but I think part of what I have enjoyed so immensely about a career in federal government has been this opportunity to explore different positions over time with these details and to see different types of lawyering and to make wonderful connections. I've been incredibly lucky, and each place along the way have had phenomenal colleagues. And so perhaps a bit trite, but ultimately what I have enjoyed most are the people. And with that, I will turn it back to Yvette.
Thanks so much, Samantha. Yeah, just so everyone knows, I did not intentionally, find panelists who had gone to Harvard. It was just a coincidence. It's like, I want to find awesome Yale women. And when I figured out who was going to speak, it actually was sort of a revelation. Like, oh, they all also went to Harvard. What's up with this? But we're so happy to have all of you. Okay, so I think it will be really interesting to hear from you all about looking back earlier in your careers. Like when was the moment when you realized that you wanted to pursue a government career? Like, is this something, let's rewind to high school, college, or what did you think you wanted to do? And then did you know early on that you might want to pursue in government, or what happened to kind of help you realize that? So Rahima, let's start with you.
I was one of those people who always wanted to be a lawyer, but I just didn't know exactly what that meant. And I think for me, it was like I want to help people, I want to serve people, and I want to see what that looks like. And so I think early on, I think I identified, and as Jillian mentioned, through Harvard, like being serving on the Legal Aid Bureau, I said, look, this is amazing. I am helping people ensure whether it's family law, whether it's benefits, that they're getting what they need. But then I was one of those people who graduated from law school with a ton of debt and ended up in private practice because I was like, I have to eat. And so I did that, and I value the years that I did spend in the private sector because it did give me a really solid foundation in some of the legal skills in terms of research and writing and speaking that I needed along the way. But then in 2008, when President, then Senator, but now subsequently President Obama was running for office, I got immersed in his campaign. As much as we can do, there is some work that we can do as even, excuse me, back then I was in the private sector. And then after he won, I said I have to figure out a way to make my way to DC because they were hiring. There were agencies that I had kind of applied to for years and had never really heard back. And so this time I said I'm going to apply again. And to all those people out there who always wonder, like, how do people get government jobs? Like, I got it through USA Jobs. I got my detail at the White House from USA Jobs. And so I applied to USA Jobs, got an interview, and then ended up at DOJ. But to me, it was something that I think it was always like a thread through my entire life, which was service to others. I think it's just my parents are public school teachers from Philadelphia, and the dinner table was always surrounded by conversations about like what are we doing to help our community, help our neighborhood, how are we serving others, and that service can be manifested in many different ways. And so over time, when I was in the private sector, I had a lot of pro bono cases, and so I would take these cases, whether they were in family law or I represented the estate of a young person who was killed while he was imprisoned, and doing a lot of this different type of work throughout my legal career, because I wanted to continue helping people, and I think that all helped me eventually be able to transition into a career in government service because it was very consistent throughout my legal career.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rahima. Jillian, how about you?
Yeah, I'm trying to sort of organize my thoughts about this. I am going to make another pitch also because I know we do have students on this call. And my first way I didn't really mention this part in my intro, but I sort of stuck my toe into the water of federal service was I was actually an AmeriCorps volunteer, a Vista volunteer. It's a little redundant because volunteers in Vista, but I did that not when people usually do it out of college, but I did it after my couple of years in private practice, which I was finding a little soul crushing. And I was wanting to get back towards a path towards public service, much like Rahima was talking about. And the AmeriCorps, Vista, and Peace Corps programs are incredible. And so I want to strongly recommend it to people, especially to students who are trying to figure out what they want or want to spend some time figuring out what working in the nonprofit or NGO sector is like. So that I did that from after I left my corporate law firm job, and I joke I went from a 6-figure salary to a 4-figure salary. But you also do that year of federal service actually is credited to my years of federal service now. So it does, they put some incentives in there in the end. So I just wanted to mention that. So that was a very positive experience for me in the interacting with the federal government. So that was a first part. And then in terms of, I think I mentioned, of course, it was working with the State Department's refugee admissions program as part of an NGO. I was very impressed with that aspect of the federal government. But I found in some ways the federal government to be sort of a middle path between corporate existence and NGO existence in a very pragmatic way, in the sense that, in terms of I had wonderful colleagues in all different contexts, but in terms of I hate the phrase work-life balance. I regret that I'm going to go back to this, but in some ways also like the resources that you have available to you, the opportunities, the different kinds of stress or focuses of your job. I found that working in the government has kind of had, in some ways, a little bit of the best of both worlds as opposed to corporate or NGO. And I think a lot of people don't appreciate that about government service. And they also, I think they kind of associate it with a sort of drudgery that if you look at Sam and Rahim and myself, that you can see you can have a very varied experience working consistently through the federal government. And in that sense, it also was a pretty good middle path between working in NGOs and working in the corporate sector.
Awesome. Thank you, Jillian. Samantha.
It would be hard to pinpoint a decision, a time with regard to a career in the federal government, because I feel like I haven't gotten there yet. I was certainly all over the map coming out of, you mentioned high school. I mean, depending on which scholarship I was applying for, I either wanted to work for the FBI and like as an agent, or work in the family court system, or, I mean, I guess there maybe was a little bit of a theme around law enforcement and the courts, but it was not one I was terribly cognizant of. And then even in law school, because I had spent time working strategy consulting with a focus on biotech, after coming out of college with like a sociology concentration, I mean, I was about as all over the map, and sort of purposefully so. I went into the strategy consulting because I felt like I didn't have enough of a background in kind of econ business world and wanted to get more of that. So like I was kind of the poster child for like keeping all the doors open, trying to, experience a little bit of everything, the smorgasbord approach to like starting a career, for better and for worse. And in law school, I did channel like a lot of what I had learned in the biotech world. I had, by the end of my time there, developed like a more significant interest in public health. So spent a lot of time in law school with a very clear focus on, being co-editor-in-chief of the Yale Journal of Health Policy, Law, and Ethics, co-founding an organization called Universities Allied for Essential Medicines. So it looked like I was headed in a particular direction. And then I spent a summer, the first summer after my 1L year, I wound up like taking some advice of a other classmate I admired, applying to civil appellate for the summer, spending the summer there, finding these wonderful, amazing people doing this phenomenally interesting, pretty nerdy litigation work. I mean, this was like in the weeds. It felt a lot like law school, and didn't necessarily expect to like it, loved it, stayed in touch with those people, got the clerkships that I got, and like applied to the judges that they recommended, got the clerkships I got because of their recommendations of me. Like, it became just these very formative experiences. And so when I was coming out of those clerkships, as much as I would have expected that I would have been headed to work on health law and policy, giving up the opportunity to apply to the honors program, which you have to do when you're coming off of clerkships. If you go and take another job somewhere else, you no longer are eligible. So it was the only way to get in. So I had to do it. Again, I thought I'd only stay a couple of years and then I'd go off and do these other things. And then of course, once I got there, the work was tremendously good. I really wanted to do and learn how to do proper appellate litigation. And they let you, very soon after you arrive, stand up in a federal court of appeals and say, Samantha Heifetz, the United States. And like, wow. Once that's cool enough that you think to yourself, well, I should do this at least a few more times, maybe 3 years or maybe a few more. There was just the attraction to that job and that work. And then around the time that perhaps I was thinking to myself, maybe it's time to look at something else and think about something else, that's when the opportunity to detail like became so important to creating longevity in relation to the government, by being able to go and have another experience, do something else, and then return to the family of civil appellate and all of the incredible work there. I will say the other thing is there's these ways in which the threads and webs, this is true for anyone, like come together in weird ways. I had this like strong interest in health policy. I've maintained parts of that outside of work through volunteer work and being a board member for organizations, et cetera, over the years. Early on, I did work that involved certain legal issues, had nothing to do with health policy. That the legal issues presented in those cases years later came up again in the Affordable Care Act litigation. And so when I got back from my first detail and became part of the appellate team defending the Affordable Care Act, it did feel in a strange way like a lot of these different strands. And I wasn't being put on that team because of an interest in health policy. I was being put on that team because of some other litigation I had done that implicated some of the same issues of federalism. But it just speaks to the fact that, sometimes it's not so much about identifying like a particular objective or a particular, epiphany moment, but just kind of riding the waves and seeing where things take you, so long as it's taking you in a direction that you are happy to be going.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Samantha. All right. So, I have a couple other questions, but I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. All of you have worked in the government career for long enough to have worked under multiple administrations. What is that like? Transitioning from one administration to the next, does it change your job every time, or what has your experience with that been? And why don't, instead of going in order every single time, just whoever feels like answering the question, just chime in, or maybe I'll have to call on you. Okay. All right, Jillian, let's just do a little different order. Jillian, what about you? Unmute.
Okay, I knew you were going to do that. This is it's revenge for some slight freshman year. I understand. No, it is. It can be more or less challenging depending on the shift administration. For us, sometimes it's very different when we have a different Secretary of State. So even like the change between Hillary Clinton to John Kerry, has some impacts depending on which office you're working in. I was working in DC at a time, and it was up on the 7th floor is what we call in the operations center. And so it can have an impact just depending on the personalities of some of the people that might be your bosses or who are leading your particular agency. And sometimes it can have this past administration was very challenging for me. When I first joined the State Department, it was during the George W. Bush administration, and I very deliberately took a path in what we call consular work, which is helping Americans abroad and immigration-related work, which was suited to my background, but also I was very interested in what we call our public diplomacy work, but I wasn't sure I'd feel comfortable being a spokesperson for some of the policies under that administration, and that was something that you have to be kind of aware of within yourself. And in doing consular work, especially when you're lower level, you're really in a lot of ways applying the immigration law, and it's not so challenging. For me, it has gotten more challenging as I've become more senior. And so your accountability and your responsibility and your decision-making are different. But it's also, and this is not specific to the last administration, but in general, administrations have become much more comfortable using what we call executive orders. I'm sure you guys are familiar with this. And so for me, as someone who, I don't want to get too bogged down in immigration law, but as adjudicates, who acts as a judge in deciding on whether or not someone can get a visa, it used to be pretty clear that we would follow a law, and we know how laws are passed and it takes a long time. But now an executive order could come down like this, like what's been known as like the travel ban. And then we have to change how we're doing our work instantaneously with no sort of process that one would generally have. And that's something that would affect directly my job, like that I was doing that day in my last assignment, for example, while I was in Italy. And it is really pretty interesting how just a lot of how the federal government has been interacting with the different branches, for example, and I'm saying this with full awareness that it is January 6th, has had a much more direct impact on you. And so this is something that maybe wasn't as apparent to me in the beginning of my career. And I definitely want to, say is that, when you're working for the US government, you're working for the US government, whoever is running the US government. And you have to be aware of what that carries with it. And a lot of my colleagues have decided that that's not something they can do in certain contexts and have resigned. And it's about looking yourself in the mirror and knowing what you're comfortable doing or not doing. And also knowing that there are literally millions of federal employees that are consistent throughout administrations. In addition to that, we see the political appointees that change all the time. And the interplay between those two groups of people can be very interesting. And for us, I think one of the more interesting ways is looking at the difference between what we call politically appointed ambassadors versus career ambassadors. So who's running, when you're working and living overseas, which is a very intense experience, who's in charge depends on whether or not you have, and what that person's experience or their ability to understand you and your job, depending on whether they were previously the owner of a football team or a Olympic figure skater, or if they were previously working in the same job as you for the last 25 years. So it's really, those are some of the parts that make it particularly challenging, but also in some ways very interesting. So like everything, two sides. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you, Jillian. Very interesting. Rahima, do you have anything to add on that topic?
One of the things that Jillian said that really spoke to me is that, you learn very quickly when you're an attorney working in the federal government that you are surrounded by a lot of just very, very talented career employees who are there through administrations. And I think that that's one of the things that maybe I think I knew, but probably underestimated before I joined the federal government, that there is just, and not just lawyers, but like there are career federal employees who make sure that whatever agency they're with, that there are laws and regulations and policies that are applied, across administrations. And as someone who was at DOJ through both terms of President Obama's administration, it just was amazing to go to work every day and know that you were surrounded by a core group of extremely talented attorneys who were committed to civil rights issues and were committed to ensuring that the United States, was at the forefront of those issues. Now, I wasn't there during the last administration. I was at the White House, so I was there from 2015 through the present. My job is very different now, that I'm not enforcing policies or regulations or laws. I'm really doing the internal workings of the White House as a business almost, and ensuring that, we legally are doing what needs to get done for those different areas that I mentioned earlier. So I think, working as an attorney in the federal government, it does look different for different people when administrations change. But I think one thing that's always constant is that you just have a high caliber of career attorneys and civil servants who are there, and that I think are essential to, the well-functioning of our government and our democracy.
Thank you so much. Samantha.
Yeah, this is, certainly a question that comes up a lot for folks who work in on the appellate staff over, the last 5 years or more. More so than the tenure on the appellate staff, the average tenure is something like 17 years. So people come and stay a very long time. And that average, we've been able to do more hiring recently, so the number may have dropped. But for when I first came into onto the staff. The number was, the average number of years was very, very high. We had a whole bunch of people who had been there more than 30, 35, 40 years. So the staff has gotten a bit younger, but this is just sort of very core to civil appellate, is this idea that you come and you work from administration to administration. And in part, it reflects like the nature of the work. We represent, and I've represented all 15 federal executive departments, and we appear in all of the courts of appeals across the country, and do, constitutional challenges, APA suits, like agency action is kind of the core, along with federal statutes, of what we're defending. And so much of that work is, the majority of it falls into these categories that are not political per se in any kind of partisan way. Federal Tort Claims Act cases, the federal government's position is going to be the same from one administration to another on most types of issues. Like when people are suing, to put it in like non-legal terms, when people are suing the government for money, Republican or Democrat, like the response is the same, which is you can't have it, as a general matter, right? So there's a lot of different kinds of, for, Privacy Act suits or FOIA or False Claims Act. There's a lot of areas of these kind of, where the legal questions are super interesting, but the answers don't change a lot from administration to administration. That's not all of our litigation, though. In a place like civil appellate, there's a whole bunch of cases, a percentage of them, not the majority, a minority, that are the top headlines of the day, and that are because you're defending agency policies. When those policies are political, the thing that you're being asked to defend is political, even though the legal arguments that you're making ostensibly are not. And so it's there that the role of career attorneys as the embodiment of institutional memory becomes so important, because we're often the ones reminding folks of what the longstanding position of the department is, the ways in which arguments made today can be used tomorrow to defend the very opposite. And we're really sensitive to the idea of administrations changing position. And that's obviously in the last administration something, it always happens to some degree, but the amount that happened grew significantly and was the source of a lot of concern. Part of the role of a career lawyer is to be on the inside, making the case for why certain arguments should or shouldn't be made. And so for some people in the last administration, some of their biggest victories were the cases that didn't get appealed, the filings that didn't happen, the arguments that weren't made. But there is no doubt that when faced with certain types of cases, it becomes important that you have an office with strong leadership that's really protective of its people. And so we were lucky that there was a real effort by the career leadership of civil appellate to allow people the opportunity to not represent the government on every matter and to be able to have some choice. Now, obviously, like there are limitations to what an office can do because of a limited number of people and a certain number of cases, but there was certainly the opportunity to say no to things. Taken together, the fact that there's so much work that's not partisan, not politically driven, the fact that there's this opportunity in every case to think about it through the lens of longstanding legal positions and arguments that will be made in the future, positions that will come back to affect the United States as a repeat player, and a caring and protective career leadership, when you put that together, the result was that, people were able to continue through the last administration, even if they were not fans of it.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Samantha. So yes, I don't know if everyone saw in the chat. I'd like to, open it up to questions from our attendees now. And so if you have a question that you would like to ask our panelists, please feel free to just raise your hand. If you'd rather not come on the screen, just enter the question in the chat. I'll read it for you. But we do encourage people to interact. It makes it much more interesting. And I see that we already have some hands raised. Stephanie.
Hi. In listening to the three of you, and thank you for participating and sharing with us tonight, it's occurred to me just what a totalizing culture that you're a part of, and how much, you obviously are, working from early morning to late at night. And I just wondered, out here in Denver, Colorado, what do you do, or do you do anything to sort of gain any kind of perspective outside of, for lack of a better term, that cliche, the DC federal government bubble?
Outside the Beltway?
Well, I don't want to say, but well, in fact, I mean, I'm sure that's the whole thing where, yes, you're all talking to other people in the federal government. And I don't know how to explain it, but how you're getting caught up in the minutia and the inner politics, and just, it's almost, I can imagine it's almost difficult to sort of even connect with some of the things that you're even, working with in terms of what those people are doing. I mean, I should imagine this is very much a challenge for you all, and yet, you are committed. I mean, how do you gain that perspective? Do you have specific things that you do that help you sort of, bust through all of that?
Well, Yvette, I'll jump in here, and I'm sure you all, Jillian and Samantha, have some perspective on this too. But as an example, I'll give you, for when I used to work at the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, like, we had nationwide coverage, the entire United States, and we were encouraged, and this is one of the things that I think that surprised me when I started working there, but we were encouraged to identify those topics, those issues, those cases that were percolating anywhere in the United States. And literally, like, I remember reading the newspaper once. I'm from Philadelphia initially. And if I saw something in the newspaper and I'm like, oh my gosh, this seems like something that we should be filing a lawsuit on behalf of. And my supervisor was like, well, okay, write up a memo that justifies why this is something that the United States should be a plaintiff. And we were plaintiffs' lawyers, basically. The United States, in my cases, was the plaintiff. And so we were bringing affirmative cases on behalf of the United States when we saw there was issues of discrimination, harassment. I was in the employment litigation section. And so if there were employment litigation issues anywhere in the country, we were trying to identify what those issues were. We were researching those issues, and then we were bringing cases on behalf of the United States in those areas. And so I ended up with cases in California, Puerto Rico, Illinois, because we weren't just kind of sitting back and waiting for people to kind of bring cases to us. We were meeting with stakeholders, having roundtable discussions, and asking them to identify for us things that were going on in their communities. And so a lot of the different Department of Justice agencies do some of the same type of work to make sure that we aren't just kind of hearing what's going on in our local neighborhoods, but we're also hearing from all people throughout the United States, because we're committed to ensuring the civil rights for all people there.
But maybe I didn't make myself clear, because that's still through the filter of your profession and what you're doing day to day. I'm talking about sort of, I don't want to sort of busting through that and being connected to something that's not even in your ambit.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that even though we're all lawyers, we still have so many affiliations that are kind of outside of our legal profession, and so I sit on the board of an organization that is focused on Muslim women's issues. And so sometimes there will be issues that will come through that avenue, that will come to me. There are issues of different boards that I sit on, or I mean, I even have friends through Facebook who would send me links about things that were going on in their local communities. And so we're still kind of connected to so many different areas that are not just, kind of Yale or Harvard or very like DC centered. There's still it's those connections that we've made along the way. So whether for me it's Philadelphia, or whether it's the boards that I sit on, or whether it's community service that I'm, passionate about, you know, I'm doing speaking engagements for all those people to make sure that they understand what their legal rights are. And, kind of cases are coming in, kind of both ways. And so I think that's one of the ways that we try to stay connected and grounded in our local communities.
Rahima, thank you so much. And Stephanie, thank you so much for the questions. We have a couple other hands raised. I want to make sure that we get to some other questions as well. Jeff.
Yeah, thank you very much. And what a great show. Thanks for putting all this together. Great panelists. Thank you. My question is actually pretty more structured, straightforward. So you all seem to be in a similar age cohort, just maybe of that, and that's kind of how it came to. You got into your positions, all various routes, you kind of explained that. In private practice, at least my experience is, you sort of, once you get into a firm and you're there, a partner, that's kind of where you are, forever. Are these positions, either yourselves particularly or in general, that, you're there throughout the rest of your careers, or these are still migrating points for the things you might do in your career?
Wish I knew the answer.
Pick the future.
That would be very helpful. I mean, civil appellate is certainly a place that people very frequently go to make their careers. When people leave, they tend to leave like after 3 or 4 or 5 years, and often to go into academia, occasionally to go to another part of the government. But we don't have a ton of turnover. So for a lot of people, civil appellate really is the whole career. And it's now a sort of unheard of, right? To stay with one office for your whole career. But I don't know if I'm quite built that way. And the number of times that I've left the office and come back is a little bit unusual. It's not infrequent for someone to have gone on a detail at some point in their long career with the office, but to have gone on like 3 over 15 years, I think reflects a little bit my wanderlust. And so personally, I don't know what the answer is for sure, but I do think that it is, there are many reasons to want to stay in the government somewhere, even if it involves movement to, from DOJ to another agency, or a different kind of work. But I can't say that I have any particular desire for myself to leave the federal government completely.
Thanks.
No, thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Samantha. Yeah, it's one of those things I didn't want to spend our whole time asking my questions, but I think several of our panelists have really alluded to. There's clearly significant benefits to working for the federal government. I mean, already they've talked about, in terms of you can work for the federal government your whole career and have a significant variety of different opportunities and change, but you have the stability and you have the other benefits, and you get paid sabbaticals like Jillian. So I would imagine that you don't have a ton of turnover for that reason. But I see we have some other questions here. So Carla, you're up next.
Yeah, hi, how are you? Thanks so much. This is great. I have a question. I have a 14-year-old daughter who is very interested in politics and community service. And what would be your advice to a young person, a teenager who would like to get involved in this area, preferably political area, public interest? She's very community oriented.
I guess it's my turn. I will just jump in and say one of the now that it's all coming back to me now that Yvette asked, when was I doing federal government? And I forgot how passionate I was about Model Congress in high school. So I don't know if that is and I was the president and like organized Model Congress in my high school. And
Oh,
now it's all coming back to me. But I thought Model Congress was incredible. I don't know how active it is. Model UN, I know, is still very active because we actually deal with it quite frequently somehow through the Foreign Service, because that's obviously a more natural connection. But I really thought that was a really interesting way to learn about the legislative branch. And then I would say also, I know 14 is a little young, but I did just also want to keep reiterating when, college is probably coming up a little sooner than you think about, there are a lot of interning and summer opportunities with the federal government. There's a lot of, the State Department sponsors a lot of high school exchange programs often also. So it's not too, it's not too young to start looking at things like Fulbright internships, the virtual student federal service that I mentioned. And then again, I have just seen so many wonderful responses, wonderful people developing connections and ideas about this through AmeriCorps, through Peace Corps. So I think that those are all paths and ways to connect in. And then I think one of the benefits of the internet that we didn't necessarily have, being of a certain age cohort, as has been pointed out, when we were 14, but is that you can find a lot of opportunities and like-minded people who are doing the kind of thing that you're doing. And so another thing that I used to do, I don't know if you're in the DC area or anywhere near the DC area, but when I was growing up in high school in New York, we actually used to, through various organizations I was involved in, I came and did marches in Washington. I did things through my synagogue where we would visit representatives or I even remember standing outside a Soviet embassy protesting treatment of Soviets as around that age. So I think that there are lots of focal points where she can connect in, and it's great that she's already so excited about it. That's who we need, that next generation.
That's very helpful. And there was one group, was it OmniCorps? I can't remember.
AmeriCorps. So
AmeriCorps.
Right, I know.
Yeah. AmeriCorps, Vista, when President Kennedy created the Peace Corps back in the 60s, they created Vista, Volunteers in Service to America. And then under the Clinton administration, it became the Corporation for National and Community Service. And through that, they have several different programs. But there's other groups like Teach for America, City Year, Habitat for Humanity have also various other versions of these really great opportunities, especially if you're young and super flexible for community service and for public interest work.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Carla, for the question. And thanks so much, Jillian, for the answer. All right. So Edward, you're next up.
Thank you. I want to look at two general questions. One is work-life balance. The people I have seen who have been successful, and especially the successful women in government, have often worked punishing hours and maybe 6 days a week. And the stuff they worked on was so exciting and so important to them that it kept them going and they loved it. But it did make a real life perhaps difficult to have outside of the work. Second general question, somewhat related, as an old fart, and I got my PhD half a century ago, so a really old one. I've seen a lot of women struggle with misogyny in the workplace, and I'm fascinated that nobody has mentioned it tonight. Is it really gone? Has the millennium come, or is it still a problem? And do you still need networking in order to band together and figure out how to get across these difficult waters?
Wow, Edward, those are great questions. All right, panelists, who would like to answer his questions?
Well, I can say something about work-life balance, not because I have any, but because I think that it is hard for everyone, for men, for women, for, no matter your situation in life in terms of children who are younger, children who are older, no children. I think it is a challenge across the board. What's helpful about that, I think the last few years have brought attention to the issue in new ways and have made the pervasiveness of the challenge clearer to many. And one hopes that something useful comes of that. There's this sort of counterpoint to the adage of do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. The other version of that is do what you love and you'll work every day of your life. And my dear friends who run these amazing, truly amazing nonprofits and projects, they'd be the first to say that second version is true. Some of the difficult, and I am just for the record here, not advocating for people to do work that they hate. I'm just acknowledging that sort of no matter how you position it, and often the more you love the work, the more of attention there can be if you're lucky enough, privileged enough to have choices in the matter. And so for me, I have been on the very lucky end of things in terms of the privilege to choose to work a lot and to be fortunate in terms of the choices that my partner, my husband, has made. And so between the two of us, we achieve balance because he's willing to, now be home with our two young children. But so between us, we strike a kind of balance that works for us for now. And I think recognizing the ways in which in one's own life, these things are constantly shifting and evolving is important. But finding an office that cares seems like a good starting place, that cares about work-life balance and the idea of it, and that recognizes the challenges of it and the importance of it. And I will say that Civil Appellate very much does that it was often described over the years as a place that could be consistent with, well, there was one person famous for saying that it was a place to be a lawyer consistent with responsible parenting. But I don't think that you need to be a parent to appreciate that. You can be a son or daughter as a member of the sandwich generation. I have a 90-year-old who lives with us. I've got my 87-year-old mom a block and a half away, two little kids. So sometimes a certain amount of work-life balance is just kind of thrust upon you and you don't have a whole lot of choice. You have just an absolute need to achieve a certain level of balance. And having an office, a workplace that recognizes those demands, that respects them, that is willing to make accommodations and that takes a long view. I think part of the reason Civil Appellate has been particularly accommodating in different ways is that it recognizes that if people do stay with a particular workplace for any extended period, there will be highs and lows, and there will be times of uber productivity, and there may be periods where people are less available for emergencies. And so developing those relationships, nurturing people as whole beings, all of that, if you can find that in a workplace, can be useful. It may not be perfect, but it certainly is better than not having that.
Oh, thank you so much, Samantha. Just lots of good advice there. And Edward, I'm sorry, your second question, I think I'm going to have to schedule another event on that topic because I think it, but it's a very important question. It is actually, it's interesting point you made that no one brought it up, but we weren't really talking about the challenges, were we? Not yet. We'll have another session on the challenges of government career for women. All right, there was one other question. Let's see, and before we wrap things up, Michaela, would you like to come on screen and ask your question?
Yeah,
Hi.
yeah, definitely. Hi, everyone. I'm Michaela. I'm a current Yale undergrad, kind of maybe interested in being a lawyer, but I don't know exactly what that entails, like one of the panelists mentioned before. I'm interested to know, what are some areas of study or possible majors that could expose me to the discipline of law, and particularly, as this is winter break, kind of like the summer internship application process. What are kind of some recommendations for possible internships for the summer?
Thank you, Michaela.
Well,
Why don't we talk about the majors? Because can you all also make sure you talk about the sort of like what your majors were also in undergrad and any advice you have for Michaela?
Yeah, I think that Jillian has put some really great links in the chat. I was a political science major. I focused on international relations. Similar to Jillian, we were in the early years of going abroad, so I actually did a semester abroad at the American University in Cairo, where I was focusing on learning Arabic. I initially thought I was going to go into more of a foreign service career. But Michaela, I will tell you that like whenever I speak to students now, I always tell them to like do what you're passionate about, whether that is issues related to women, refugees, whether it's the environment, whether it's issues of anything, because there are legal issues that underpin all of these substantive areas. And the more you can be passionate about a particular area, the better it will be for you. It's something that can carry you through your career. And it's something that you can always use as, things that you remain committed to, that you're working on, irrespective of whether you're getting paid to do it. And so I always tell people that you don't really necessarily have to worry about, like, I did become a political science major, but I was just really interested in those classes at Yale, honestly. But like, you don't really have to be a major in anything particular to go to law school. And so really you want to major in something that you're interested in. And honestly, the classes that you get the best grades in also.
That's awesome advice, Rahima. And Jillian, I forgot, what was your major?
I'm sorry, I'm like diligently posting tons of links.
I see. I love that. I love that. Thank you so much.
I know. I felt really bad about the Model Congress thing. I'm making up for it with I was an American Studies major, and I think that was mostly because I wanted to take as many classes as possible that I was interested in, and it was the most flexible. I kind of had a concentration in gender studies, and I just want to say a couple of things about law school, just because you're thinking about it, not so much about the internships, but a few things. One thing I don't regret that I went to law school. I regret I went to law school directly out of college. I feel that a lot of my law school classmates who had done something else maybe appreciated law school a little bit more than I did. The first year of law school is generally the same everywhere you go in the world. It's very rigid. It's very regimented. If you've just been like a senior in college where you control your own destiny, having your assigned seat for the classes that you can't decide which classes you get to take, it's a bit of an abrupt shift after college. So I would say think about doing some of these other programs or something else, maybe before going directly to law school would be a piece of advice I have. And then another thing to think about that Rahima was kind of joking about getting the good grades, but it can make a difference where you go to law school in terms of just being sort of strategic. We've talked a little bit about the debt situation and how it can influence the decisions you make. I believe in trying to give yourself as many choices as possible, and crippling debt can make it hard to make those choices. And so you might want to think about, okay, am I in state somewhere? Graduating at the top of your class from an in-state law school can sometimes have depending on what you've decided you're interested in, or different law schools have a lot of different focuses. So I mean, again, it's a huge amount of money to pay. So I think taking some time beforehand, and also being a little strategic about where you go, what's that going to cost? Can you get some sort of financial aid or public interest kind of fellowship? Or, Sam mentioned about loan forgiveness. Federal government actually has several loan forgiveness programs. The State Department has one as well. But it's good to think about that because, again, you want to give yourself some choices. And law school is amazing training. I mean, I don't really practice law technically, although I don't understand how a lot of people do my job without having a legal background. But you can do anything with a law degree. So, what Rahima is saying, like, think about what you're interested in, and then think about the investment and make a strategic investment that makes sense for your future to give you, because you don't know where you're going to wind up. And so just, you want something that's going to be as helpful as it can be to get you where you want to go.
Well, thank you so much, Jillian. Tons of useful tips there. So great. So before we wrap it up, Stephanie just wants to share with everyone what's coming up next on our Thursday night shows.
Yes, to show you that we offer great variety. Next week, the subject is the art, science, and business of craft brewing with head brewer Tamar Banner. Tamar is class of 99 Yale College, anthropology major, and is a woman that was at the forefront of the craft beer industry, working for New Belgian Brewery in Colorado, and she now is at a craft brewery in Denmark. In fact, she will be joining us at 2 a.m. in the morning. So come out and support her and learn about, she's also what is called a cicerone, which is like a sommelier of beer. So you can find out what to serve with what foods and the like. And Ed, in fact, because of course, her being a woman in a male-dominated industry, you can come next week and ask your same question about misogyny.
Oh, there you go. Yes, Edward, please come next week and ask it.
I mean, think about all those beer names.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, thank you so much, Stephanie. And so, yes, thank you all to the three panelists for joining us tonight and just sharing your amazing professional stories with us. I mean, you're an inspiration to me, and your stories are really just a terrific learning experience for us all. So thank you again for giving your valuable time. And I hope to see everyone again at another Thursday night show. And thanks also to those of you who joined and asked such terrific questions. All right, well, have a wonderful evening, everyone. Bye-bye.